Good morning, everybody. It's Brian, and I'm coming to you live from Raleigh, North Carolina, in my hotel room. No reason to explain. It just happens to be where I'm at. But we are here live on Bacon and Coffee. So let's start with a 30-second countdown. All right, everybody, welcome to Bacon and Coffee, and it would not be Bacon and Coffee without our caffeine and bovine intro. Hey, good morning, everybody. And I have some great guests here today. It's Mr. Mark Babbitt and then Mr. Chris Edmonds, who's trying to point, No, it's that way. It's all that. You guys are that way, at least on my screen. So how the heck are you guys?
We're good. Coffee is ready. My wife's already cooked up some bacon and said I should have brought it on screen, but I wasn't that brave. So,
well, you could have been.
Yeah.
And so, Mark, tell everybody where you're at, and Chris, you can say how you're doing and where you're at.
I am between Colorado Springs and Denver in a place called Palmer Divide up in the trees in Colorado.
You live in a tree?
He lives
5
in
acres
the
of
mountains.
Trees and mule deer and elk and turkey, and yeah, it's like friggin' wild kingdom here. Yeah, it's great.
And I'm doing great. Good morning, everybody. I'm also in Colorado. Used to do the mountains thing, and then after 14 years came to my senses, and so we've been down in the metro area, just outside of Denver here for the last 18 months, and kind of getting used to it. Suburbs.
That's nice. Now you're surrounded by trees too, but your trees happen to have strings and whammy bars on them.
They do, and the trees are very young. This is a 7-year-old, neighborhood / community, still building houses, and it's quite different than the 40-foot pines we had up in Conifer, Colorado.
Nice. So, all right, we are here to talk about none about trees or guitars or all that kind of fun stuff. We're here to talk about your book. And so, Mark, you got a copy of the book, and you going to hold it up? Or
well, let's see. How can I? It's actually right behind me and Chris. You got one, Chris?
Oh, Chris got the one. Here he goes. Yeah. See, this is live, so we can do this.
Yeah.
Look at this. Here it
comes.
Well,
we didn't have the prop ready. Sorry.
Yeah. Good comes first. All right. So excellent. Well done, Chris. You could, if I need a Vanna White, I think Chris should apply.
Chris is the hand model. That was good.
That was really good. Well, he's got good hands. They're very strong hands because he plays guitar. I mean, that's why. So let's get down to brass tacks. And if anybody has any questions, if you're watching this live, feel free to say hi in the comments. I can see the link in the comments, but I'm not. Since I'm in a hotel room, I don't have my. I'm not a Command Central, so I don't have all those screens. Here's a LinkedIn user and says. 3 great guys all together, awesome. It just says LinkedIn user, so I have no idea who
said that, so we can
say
thank
right.
you.
That's right.
Well, that's okay. Anonymous. Hey, bottom line is we have an anonymous fan club. That's cool by me. So let's. That's
called a stalker, I think, Brian. I think that's called a stalker.
I don't mind stalkers. Stalkers can be okay. As long as they don't hurt you, that's okay. So
focus.
So let's dive into brass tacks. And the brass tacks are, what was it about this book that you guys wanted to write? I mean, all of a sudden you've been working with people and you saw a need. You don't write a book because you feel like it. You write it because there's a purpose. So what was kind of the trigger for you guys? What made you say, hey, let's write a book together?
Well, let me start. I recall meeting Mark face to face for the first time about 7 years ago. And yet we've been friends on social media for easily 10 years. And meeting face to face and going out to a steak dinner in downtown Chicago was expensive but delicious. But we really realized we had a very compatible viewpoint of what leaders need to do to create work cultures that don't suck. So, and both of us had been in the culture space and leadership space. And so we actually started the book about 3+ years ago with a bit more of a future of work kind of focus. And then this pandemic thing happened, which made us realize that really the root isn't about future of work, it's about now. And so we were able to take a year into a publication, a manuscript, and throw that away, start again, and find literally that leaders need to understand that the work environment is their creation, and it's their responsibility to refine it if it sucks, to create civility and, God forbid, maybe respect, which leads to better performance. So that's my view of the genesis.
Okay. And then, hey, Mark, what kind of steak did you have, and was it good?
All right. So, boy, we're getting into way too much detail here.
That's the whole point.
I was actually not feeling well that night, and I did not have a steak. I sat there and had a glass of water while Chris had his steak, but it looked really good.
It didn't last long. I did not share. Ribeye.
Nice. So, okay. So what was your impetus, Mark? What drove you to work with Chris, and why was that important?
Well, first of all, Chris, in addition to being quite literally a pioneer in the culture space, in the culture leadership space, as he said, we kind of came at it from the same point of view that we got a little tired of CEOs, nonprofit executive directors, startup founders saying, "Oh, well, culture, it is what it is. It's I've talked to HR about this. And yeah, it's not great, but HR is going to fix this." Wrong, dead wrong. Culture is a leadership issue. And Chris and I found that every time we said that out loud, it was like talking to a brick wall. And now it's different. Now I hope in part because of the book, but also certainly because of the Great Resignation, leaders are finally starting to understand that there's only one person responsible for their company culture, and that's them. And if we have any one message in the book, is that CEOs, presidents, executive directors, founders, they need to own this process, or their culture is going to be incidental at best, perhaps even accidental. It's going to take on the worst personality traits that are tolerated throughout the company. And pretty soon you're going to have a toxic culture that it's just going to seem impossible to fix, but it's not. You got to start with ownership of the problem.
We'll kind of dig into that, the problem a little bit, but so based on your answers, both your answers, I'm assuming that this book is best served by a CEO. In other words, if they read it, but who else in the company would benefit from this, or who might be the trigger point? Because one of the things I've learned about interviewing people who write B2B books is a lot of times the CEOs are so headstrong that usually it's like a VP or even a manager leader of a segment often says, "Hey, things are broken," and they got to get the CEO's ear and say, "Dude or dudette, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but there's a problem, and I think we need to look at it," right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's no question that our bias is towards those with leadership responsibility. That might be someone with former title and responsibility. It may be someone who's a project team leader that may not have a quote formal authority, but is still leading the work of others. We've been able to get wonderful experiences with heads of divisions, of plants, of kind of smaller segments of a larger organization, and often it's the leader of that team or that shoe store / guitar store, right?
Right.
Realizing that that something needs to change here, and I can't delegate this to anybody, so I've got to kind of lead it. So Good Comes First literally is a guidebook to helping leaders evaluate their current culture, see if it's close to at all what their ideal culture is, and then begin to be a bit more structured, a bit more intentional about the work culture and how people are treated every day.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that's kind of the key. But we literally realize that there's a lot of folks throughout the globe who have quit their jobs because their bosses weren't managing a even neutral work culture.
Mhm. Mhm. So getting back to that kind of concept, I mean, the word culture is such a buzzword nowadays, right? It's like you want to have that culture, that Google culture, the Amazon culture, whatever culture it is. But it goes back to, it reminds me of the days at corporate, we're dealing with Six Sigma and 360 reviews and all this other stuff. And, that buzzword kind of gets, it starts to dull our brains. But what would be the three core things that you guys see that if somebody actually did what you put in the book, let's assume number one, they buy the book, number two, they actually read the book, and number three, they actually implement the stuff. What would be the three core things that you would see them, taking away from reading and getting into that book?
Well, Brian, it's the best possible question, because it's funny. The media, business leaders, chambers of commerce, recruiting sites, they're all talking about the labor shortage, and that's just total bull.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yes, there's been a reprioritization. People are certainly, after having this great experience of working from home, they're certainly reluctant to go back to the old normal that wasn't profitable or fulfilling for anyone but the company. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, we don't have a labor shortage. We have a systemic failure to focus on workplace respect, and when people don't feel respected, they're gonna walk in today's climate. And so that's what's causing the great resignation. It isn't a labor shortage, it's people exercising their right to choose where they work. It's almost a quiet revolution.
And the other thing about that too, because it brings up a good point, Mark, and that is, we're in a culture shift. And I understand this culture shift very well because I've got two millennial kids, right? One is, they're both in their 30s. One works for PepsiCo, one works for like small stores and stuff like that. And the thing that I understand about them is, and I've talked about this on this show before. Um, my dad grew up in the Depression, so everything was save all the money, buy the house, do the things, yada yada yada, right? So I was kind of the post-Depression kid where you went to college, you got married too young, then you got divorced, then you got married again, and then you bought a house, and you do all that, right? Exactly, you do all that stuff. And my kids, they don't own anything. I mean, my daughter doesn't own a car. My son owns a car. He wants to sell it, and he'd sell it tomorrow if he could. But he just has to get back and forth to work occasionally, right? He'd much rather work out of the house. So, the atmosphere is different, right? The values of the employees are different. They don't work to live. They work to have time and the resources to experience, right? So the whole culture, I don't want to get back to the culture word, but the whole culture of the employee base has changed. So us as leaders have to learn how to adapt to this and understand it. We can't put our views. I'm certainly, when I started my first company, I was putting my father's views on my employees, and that didn't work very well. And now all my employees, or they're actually contractors, but same deal. I still treat them like employees. I love them, respect them, and do all these other things. I mean, they're moms with kids. They say, hey, I've got to do some homeschooling. It's like, cool, go do your thing. It's like, it's all good. Get back to me when you're ready. So I think that there's that big shift. So let's get back to that main question: is what are the three core takeaways that these people are going to get?
Well, let me build on the respect piece. That is absolutely the foundational takeaway that we want leaders to recognize, to not only become aware of it, to begin to even start to observe interactions in their workplace in a little different way with a different filter. And it's the issue that, for the most part, and Brian, you just hit it, most leaders have never been taught how to change the quality of their work culture. They, in fact, have never been incented or rewarded to improve the health of their work culture. So they're reticent to go there. And the other piece is they know what they have lived through up to now. And so what great leaders are going to be able to do now is to be able to let different generations influence. Millennials, Gen X's, Gen Z's. I just saw an article last week of people talking about Gen AA. We're going into the kind of double alphabet here now. But there's different desires, there's different needs. I would even go so far as to say there's different demands from different generations. But what is very interesting about the 44 million Americans alone quit their jobs voluntarily last year from January to November. We're waiting on the December data. That's a lot of people to quit. Mm-hmm. And they're quitting because they're not going to take it anymore. They know they have a choice and they also have a voice. And so they're pushing back a bit. And so not every business is facing this. Not every organization is facing this. But overwhelmingly, what we see is if leaders take the responsibility and actually implement these practices, it's a very straightforward process, they're going to create an environment where employees love to come to work. And if employees love to come to work, the buzz in the hood, be that a global neighborhood, a region, is going to be, this is a pretty good place to work. I'm treated fairly. I'm given flexibility. I can learn cool new stuff and grow. They pay me well. The benefits are great. And when you think about companies that have employees that say that, they do not have a labor problem.
Yeah, that's because the people in the company are telling their friends on social media how much they love their jobs and how well things are. And then basically the happiness becomes the brand that is disseminated, which, you know, for my world is one of the things is when social media comes around, the culture is turn off all social media, right? We don't want people to be unproductive. And I think that's a huge mistake because you're losing the opportunity to create advocates to bring you more people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, boy, what a great point, Brian. It's funny how this mindset has shifted. You know, in 2010, when social media really started getting popular, especially in the workplace, we went from we got to shut down all social media in corporate America because we want people to focus at work. Well, then we found out that as leaders, we found that was pissing people off. And so we weren't trusting them to get their work done while they still lived a life. So we went from, okay, well, we got to shut down social media to, well, now we can't shut it down because that was not a great employee experience. So now we're going to try and control what people say. We're going to manipulate what people say about work. And that worked even worse.
Right? You mean they hand you a corporate handbook that says these are acceptable things you could say on Facebook? And that's
there
the
are
only
companies
thing
who actually did that. Yes.
Right. And then if you don't do that, then you're going to be brought into HR and you're going to get a hand slap. Right.
Yeah. So
thanks for the visual, Chris.
as part of the manipulation process, we started, and Chris and I say this all the time, company culture is rewarded based on the positive behaviors, workplace behaviors.
Do we freeze him?
That are rewarded and destroyed by the behaviors that are negative and have an impact on the culture that's not productive or positive. And so what we did was employers started disciplining, punishing people for having a voice, which is exactly the opposite of what millennials and Gen Z wanted. So again, we're back to the bad employee experience thing, right? So companies have learned a lot over the last 10, 11, 12 years about the role social media plays. Well, here we are now. And as Chris said, 44 million, almost 50 million people by the time.
We
And there
lost
he goes.
Mark. I'll finish
But you
that
can keep,
idea.
yeah, keep going.
Yeah, there's not going to be. What is very interesting about this point in time is there hasn't been such a significant tsunami, and not only a groundswell of people saying, literally, I'm not going to take this anymore.
Right.
You can pay me $3 an hour more. No, that's not the problem. The problem is treating me with respect. And what's interesting, Brian, we know these ideas are going to be intriguing to leaders. The hard part is implementing it, right?
Right.
And
Well,
so what I think the third takeaway is of the book is that leaders have to be as intentional about respect being demonstrated in their workplace as they are about results being delivered in that workplace. So we're putting respect and results on the same podium, shall we say. We're in the Olympics time frame. But what it requires is that leaders need to be very specific about these are our values. These are the 2 or 3 behaviors that will assure us that you are modeling this value. There's thousands of ways to model this value, but there's millions of ways to not embrace it. And so what is, I think, the third key piece is just as you manage performance by setting performance targets and coaching, right, and then measuring. Let's set, respect expectations, model it, measure it. What a surprise.
Right. And we do have a guest. Oh, I moved my screen. See, I'm not used to this because everything at the office is all
It's
like
nailed down.
Yeah, it's all nailed down. And yeah, when you have a production studio, but when you're in a hotel room, it's a different world. And we have somebody joined us, Ryan Weiss, who was last week's, or was it last week's or 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago. But anyways, he's got a question. We'll get to that in a minute. And it's about process. So since we got you, and hopefully, Mark can climb up a tree and shake the antenna, because that's, he lives in those trees, and that satellite isn't quite getting there quite well. So the question for you is, somebody sees your book, they realize that there's a problem. There's usually a gap between what the perceived problem is and what the real problem is, right? So what is the perceived problem that the C-level or the plant manager or whoever is going to get this book thinks that they have, and what is it about that triggers them to want to look at this? So what's the perceived problem?
Typically, in our experience, the perceived problem is the culture. Again, Mark said it earlier. It is what it is. There's nothing we're doing to intentionally move it, shift it, drive it, check to see if it's okay. And so one of the perceived problems is our job here is to deliver X widgets, whatever those widgets are. And people have been doing it for 10 years or 30 years or whatever it is. And so shut up, sit down, do your thing, right?
Right.
And so there's not let's call it an appreciation that's expressed on the part of leaders for, you guys are frustrated. You guys aren't having a good time. You're not able to meet the standards that we used to have. What's happening? And all of a sudden you can get into supply chain and change, market pressures as far as pricing and yada, yada, yada. And that's what leaders need to be able to focus upon is what are the employees' frustrations? And those frustrations may not be of my creation as a senior leader in my team or my department, et cetera, but it's my job to try and mitigate those as fast as possible. So it's an interesting shift from shut up and do your work. And it's the only concept I have, right? Leadership is simply hiring enough people to get crap done. And then there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying at work. Right? We don't want any drama, but shut up and deliver. And that is not at all the actual root problem. The root problem is the absence or lack of respect.
Got it. And Mark, it's nice to know that you were able to climb up that tree and adjust your satellite.
There you go. Done.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You're much better. So back to the perceived problem versus the real problem. And I think, Chris, you kind of hit it on the head, at least from my perspective. And that is that, people have spent years developing what they consider to be the current corporate culture, and they don't understand the minutiae. It's the old adage of, you cannot see the forest from the trees, but the other thing too is you never see a beach road until it's gone, right? It's the same kind of thing. And so we know what the perceived problem is, but what is the real problem? What is the the big picture thing that is really holding these people back from wanting to adapt the change in culture that you're talking about?
Well, I'll take a shot at that first.
Mhm.
Again, to frame it around what Chris basically said, I'll paraphrase is Chris said we don't know how to make people happy. Well, have you tried? Or are you still relying on leadership techniques from 1974? And so the perceived problem, again paraphrasing, is people don't want to work. The real problem is people don't want to work here for me, for my managers within this existing process. And so it's a wake-up call. It's a corporate societal wake-up call to say we need to make the workplace work better. And when we tell and when we actually call people out in the book, we refer to people who refuse to change, refuse to adapt. We say they are suffering from boomer male syndrome. And that is not to imply that only old white guys
like us
find themselves in this position, but 80% of them are, because 80% of our business leaders are old white guys. And so it's a huge transition for someone to go from, well, we know the pandemic was bad and we know we were forced to let you work from home. And we're glad that you enjoyed all that freedom and autonomy and that you finally got to decide when and where and how your work got done. But forget all that. I'm going to be a leader again and get your asses back to work. And, oh, by the way, nothing's going to change. Well, that's the real problem is his employees are listening to that and going, oh, hell no.
Right.
I like being home for my dog. I like being home when my kids got home. I like helping them with school. I was more engaged in their homework. I like being here for my elderly parents. I like being part of a community again, as virtual as it was, where I just got to get my work done within this new balance that I found and I like. And that's the real problem, Brian, is the pandemic has accelerated. Chris started this whole conversation by saying the first version of our book was all about the future of work. Well, guess what? The future of work is now.
Right. It accelerated.
And the pandemic accelerated everything about the future of work. And back to the real problem, leaders have not adapted at all. Like they're not, they're just going to go, nope. Yes, we had a pause on what we wanted work to be. And that led to you enjoying work more. But through that, we're going back to work.
Yeah, as I say, I've got these things called baconisms, and then I put them up as called bridging the gap. And my favorite one is normal is just a setting on a dryer. Right?
Oh, I love that. I'm so stealing that.
Yeah, go ahead. Feel free. I repurposed it from somebody else. That's what, when somebody steals one of my memes, I always say I call it repurposing. It's and I'm gonna get to Ryan's question in a couple of minutes because he's got a good question, but it deals more towards the process side of things. But a LinkedIn user said, "Thanks for clarifying what the Great Resignation is. I guess I was born too early. My mindset as an employee was always to be respected as someone who." Which didn't always happen. He wanted to be respected as something that didn't happen, he or she. And it says, I'm glad to see the world is catching up. So I think there's somebody out there who actually gets it, and I think, I mean, the news, love it, hate it, whatever it is, news is news, bleeds, it leads. It's there to paraphrase what's going on, but it's really not getting to the root cause. And that's why something like this is so important. So taking that to the next, or go ahead, Chris, you had something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to have leaders realize that we understand what we're presenting is much, much, much different than maybe the way you've defined what leadership has been and what it is for you now. And we basically start our partnerships with clients with a pretty important discovery phase, and it's interviews, and it's reviewing employee engagement surveys and that kind of thing. And it gives us a snapshot of how the culture operates. And when we come back, there's always stuff that's seen as beneficial, and there's always stuff that are gaps. And Brian, you said it. So how do we help leaders not only proactively look for gaps, but then immediately change systems, policies, even people, so those issues are reduced in their negative impact? And the problem most leaders has is, we need HR to do a survey, right? And then the gap comes back and leaders don't quite know what to do. So what we want to do is to help them create an environment where really smart, good people, talented, engaged, help you proactively solve those problems so they never bubble up. They treat your customers great. I mean, there's wonderful benefits, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay. So from here, we've kind of identified what the perceived problem is, what the real problem is. And basically the perceived problem is we've always done it this way, and change ain't going to happen easily. It's hard to turn the boat around, all those kind of things. The real problem is change is here, whether you like it or not, and you have to adapt. So what is the overarching solution? Not the step-by-step, but what is the overarching solution to this?
Well, I tell you what, Brian, first it starts with everything Chris just said, that we have to be willing to adapt. But here's the problem. Even well before the book came out, we were already hearing, especially us old white guys, that we had to stop being autocratic. We had to, the command and control leadership wasn't working anymore. That is a 15-year-old conversation. And it hasn't gotten any better over those 15 years. We're not listening. We're not adapting. And so even positioning the book, our agent and our publisher said, okay, great, but what's different about this that's not already being said? And we realized that our practice, Chris and I's work together, was that guidebook, was a blueprint for actually changing leaders' perception of company culture and then changing the culture. And so that's where we had to start. And I mentioned earlier this boomer male syndrome thing. So great, you're pissing off the people that you actually want to read the book, right? So maybe not that productive, but the conversation had to be started. We couldn't just have the same conversation that's been happening on Forbes and Entrepreneur and Fast Company and Business Insider for 15 years. We had to have a very real conversation, and we had to talk directly at the leaders, or we weren't going to get anywhere. And I think that's where it started, and that's what's different about this. And I know it's a long-winded answer to your question, but we had to take a more bold approach to this entire problem, because culture is such a buzzword, because it's right up there with employee engagement on what management thinks they can manipulate rather than actually fit. We had to have a different conversation.
That's one of my other favorites too, employee engagement.
You notice how we all do this now when we talk about everybody does.
You got to air quote everything.
Everything, yeah.
Well, and see, one of the things in my world, again, engagement on social media, engagement in marketing is very different. It's like, and this kind of probably will help you guys kind of guide into the process steps too, which is the next question. Unless Chris, you want to add something to that?
I was gonna head that direction.
Okay. So one of the things that I talk about a lot with engagement is, engagement is, there's two different kinds of engagement. There's purposeful driven metrics, and then there's vanity, right? Vanity metrics say I have 500 followers in LinkedIn, so I'm popular. And, I get 5,000 hits a month to my website, so I'm popular. But nobody's measuring, are those hits to your website, Russian bots, or are they CEOs? The bottom line is most of my customers, I tell them, hey, if I got you 10 qualified human beings to get to your website a month, and they actually picked up the phone and had a conversation with somebody, your business would boom so big you wouldn't know it hit you.
Yeah.
And so, what is your goal? Do you want 5,000 hits on your website, or do you want 10 people to pick up the phone and buy from you? And so the key question is, where do you want to go? So I'm assuming your processes are based on that kind of too. It's like, it's one thing to pay lip service to it and measure the vanity metrics of, hey, we did an employee survey, and their lifestyle engagement process,
Blah,
whatever,
blah,
whatever
blah.
keyword has gone up 7.3% since we
Yeah.
put bananas in the cafeteria. It's like, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's the real process? What are the things? What's kind of the steps 1 through 3, 1 through 5, whatever it is that they've got to go through in order to get to where they need to be?
Well, we realize that leaders haven't been taught how to revise their culture. And so we need to build upon existing skill sets. And I made reference to that, and we'll loop back to that in a minute. But we also need to make it rather simple. So there's 3 steps that we propose in the book and in our practice. Define your desired culture, then align plans, decisions, actions, players to that formalized culture. And then you may have to refine people. You may have to refine practices. You may have to refine systems, etc., so that that ideal culture, your desired culture, really is lived day to day. And so define is the first step. And we can go into a great wonderful rabbit hole with that. But literally, it's the formalizing of the servant purpose of your organization. Notice that there's a rather distinct definition of purpose / mission / vision. Servant purpose is about what you do for others, and who are those others, and what do you provide to them. So it's an interesting shift from our legit purpose day to day is to make money. Yep, I get that. And I was a nonprofit exec for 15 years, and we still had to make money. Otherwise, we couldn't run our programs, drive our buses, all that kind of stuff. So having a purpose that is clearly demonstrating how you improve the quality of life of others, that's an interesting one. And that's the first piece of this organizational constitution. Then we ask you to formalize values in observable, tangible, measurable terms. That's the biggest shift. And again, I want to loop back to leaders. Do you proactively set performance targets? Yes. Do you set performance goals? Yes. Do you monitor those? Are there consequences? Here you did good. Oh gosh, here's what you have to do to fix that. So there's a bit of a system of clear expectations, monitoring, coaching, measuring. Let's do that. Let's do that same thing with the values. So we ask people to say, take honesty as a value. It's a very attractive value for organizations. And then what 2 or 3 behaviors do you need people to be demonstrating, no matter their roles, right? Bosses to bosses, team members, coaching a boss, whatever. How do you want them to be acting such that it will lead you to believe that honesty, as you see it needed in this work culture, is being demonstrated? So it means we need a list of 3 values, not 10. We need 2 or 3 behaviors each that are measurable. And just then, as you measure performance results, you measure respect results. So that's the define piece. Mark, do you mind jumping in and filling in the kind of systems behind align and refine?
Of course. So now and this is Chris's brainchild, the organizational constitution. We have a piece of paper that says exactly who we are, why we're in business besides making money, who we serve, how we make our lives better, and the values and behaviors that would indicate that we're succeeding at all of that, right? And they're all clearly defined now. So now we have to jump into this, the second phase, which is align. Now we have to figure out who's living those values now, by the way, from the C-suite on down. Do we have a leader that's living in that 1970s, do as I say, not as I do realm, or do our leaders actually serve as chief role models for these values that we've decided are important? demonstrate the behaviors that we've stated in the organizational constitution are not just valid but lived. And then once we have that, now we have to have that measure piece, right, which is a huge part of the align process. Now we have to survey the employees, the leaders, in some case even our customers or vendors, on how they're being treated. And now we have that delta, we have that gap. We say, okay, well, this team, according to our data survey, quantifiable data, yes, we can measure a human value, a human behavior. We can do that. And we show you how to do that, and good comes first. And now we say, well, we want to score a 5 or a 6, and we're scoring 1s and 2s and 3s, right? Well, now Align is closing that gap between the 1s, 2s, and 3s and the 5, 6s. And sometimes it's by the leader, sometimes it's by the team, sometimes it's by the colleague or the coworker that just isn't buying into this new culture, these new definitions of values. They're not just the mission statement of the values we threw up on the wall or on a poster in a conference room. We're actually required to live, to breathe these values. And some people just say, no, that isn't how it was before. I'm not really happy here. Entire teams can revolt. Other teams become quite good at it, become contagious pockets of excellence that everybody else goes, holy crap, they're doing really good and we're not. What are they doing different, right? So that all happens in the align process. And finally, the refine process is we're going to take all this data now and put it to good use. And we're going to further close those gaps, even if it means that certain leaders and certain employees, we might have to set them free, lovingly set them free. Chris says we might have to let them go be successful somewhere else because they're not thriving within this defined and aligned culture. And our refinement process is, Chris and I say this all the time, attrition is your best friend. People are going to self-select out, and others are going to say, screw it, I've been with this company 20 years, I'm not changing. Well, show them the door, because if they're not aligned to the culture, and if they're not allowing themselves to be refined, if the mentoring and the coaching isn't working, you can't be here anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
And let me add to that. One of the interesting pieces about this is consequences. And literally what we find is many of the leaders that we work with, they're not great at performance consequences either, right? There's just this belief that, well, we're going to formalize this cool spreadsheet that has all of our targets and everybody's going to be green, right? Month in and month out. And that's extremely rare, right? That happens. It actually takes bosses to understand, to listen, to reflect, to problem solve, right? Or to remove performance hindrances anywhere you can. Well, you're going to have much greater cooperation and sharing and in essence, celebration in a culture that is based on respect, because people know, well, if their team is struggling, I'm going to see how do we rally to help them in some way. And you can really see this as organizations faced this pandemic and having to close, or restaurants having to do takeout, yada, yada, yada. There's so many incredibly negative impacts on so many people. But the reality is that if we start to look at how do we help leaders hold people accountable for changing their behavior and being civil, that's kind of step one, right? And step 8 is demonstrating respect. And Mark and I really believe wholeheartedly that this is the key. If you can get to a stage where you've communicated behaviorally defined values, then you can measure those. And we literally have a part of our business that helps clients create custom values surveys. And we even administer those. And it's where leaders go, well, you can't measure honesty. If we define it in behavioral terms, we can. And so what this does is it helps give leaders clear, undeniable data about performance, kind of a little XY graph thing, and clear, undeniable data about respect. And so if you want people in the upper right, doing high performance and high values, high respect, it ain't going to happen casually. It has to be modeled, reinforced, coached. And if there are people who need coaching and mentoring and they align to your desired culture, cool. If they don't, they have to leave. And it's fine. You're not mad. You can't work here anymore. That's
right.
exactly what Mark said.
So this kind of feeds into Ryan's question that I was holding off for this segment. And Ryan asked, he said, he'd love to hear your thoughts about how purpose-driven organizations align and communicate performance metrics. So how do purpose-driven organizations communicate and align that? And employees need to balance profit and sustain their impact, is what he's saying. So how does that work?
Well, so I will tell you traditionally how it works is even at purpose-driven organizations, they're still responsible to someone, whether it's investors or shareholders. There's even the purpose-driven organizations are still driven by results, not respect. And so Chris and I have worked with several purpose-driven organizations. We've even worked with faith-based organizations where you would think people were almost automatically treated with civility and respect. And it turns out it's one of the worst systems in the world because we say we're purpose-driven, we say we're even God-driven, but then we treat each other completely disrespectfully in a very highly competitive environment. And I'm not just picking on faith-based or nonprofits or purpose-driven companies.
We see it everywhere.
Yeah, you had mentioned earlier, well, everybody wants to be Google or Amazon. Guess what? There are millions of people inside Google and Amazon who think those cultures suck.
Right.
Thrive there at all, right?
And that really gets to one of the core questions I want to dive into too, which is kind of a follow-up question on this. And this is the one that I had, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I listened to, creating corporate culture. I kind of preambled that before we got on. And, they talk about, Facebook's. Well, first and foremost, when you talk about religious organizations doing those kind of things, it sounds like Facebook, all the things you see on Facebook, right? But Facebook as a culture, they talk about, employee engagement and autonomy and all these other things. And then, you get somebody who comes on TV and says, I can't stand this place because they do all things, crazy. So I think one of the hardest things that, Chris, you brought up a while ago when we started this, which was, I'm looking over at my other screen, when you define what your corporate culture or your attitude is going to be, how much of that is synthesis from what you've read in magazines, books, news, all this other stuff, the happy, joy stuff, and how much of it is a self-reflection of leadership to try to come up with something different? How do you find that? Because that seems to be the hardest thing, is defining what the heck you want, right?
Well, and you have to kind of be careful of what you formalize, because all of a sudden, by formalizing it, by putting it on the wall, you make it real, it gets powerful. And so to be able to say, we want to be the best automobile brake pad manufacturer on the planet. I have no one I know that works at an automobile brake pad, plant. But it's like, well, yeah, you can do that, but people can be backstabbing and withdrawing support and withholding information, so that dynamic of we're the best means, no, within this company, I'm the best and you suck. And so there's not really an overarching view of, we need to create an environment where people are validated and respected for their ideas, insights, and contributions every day. Now, you ask 10 leaders in any organization, anywhere, what their job is, these things aren't going to come up. Respect and validate people for their ideas, efforts, and contributions. I don't even like these people, right? Which is not always the refrain of leaders. But right. I hope it gets to, Ryan, your question about this whole idea of balancing profits and balancing purpose. And we have had the pleasure of working with companies who figured that out. And it always starts with, Brian, you said it well, leaders being willing to reflect. Here's what I've created here. It isn't exactly what I hoped it was, and nor is the employee experience respectful day to day. So here's some tactical things we can start to reduce the demeaning, discounting that happens and increase the validation.
Awesome. Okay, so before I get to the last point, so a company can make brakes that can stop a car, but they can't stop people from sucking, is what you're saying.
I think that's true.
Well, that's one way to do it. Well, and back to Ryan's question just a little bit. So we've actually worked with a company that builds automotive parts, and not necessarily brake pads, but their servant purpose was our products save lives. And so it brought them back to not just production and results, but purpose, right? And so everybody who goes to work there every day realizes if they do their job well, if they continue to innovate, if they put out a quality product, then they are literally saving lives. Down, and they talk about this, down to babies in car seats in the back seat buckled in perfectly with their equipment, right? And so it gets very real for them. And now I'm just not making $23.55 an hour. I'm contributing to this servant purpose of saving lives. And so even something as old school, as blue collar, as automotive parts, getting back to Ryan's question, can be purpose driven. And that's where a respectful work culture starts.
And see, I think that kind of answers both those questions in one nutshell, or kind of puts it in a nice little bow. So let's, believe it or not, gentlemen, we've been doing this for 50 minutes. It feels like 5.
How time flies.
I know, especially when you have such great thinkers and deep questions. Well, the questions aren't that deep, especially. Going off on the final journey of this. And so one of the things about bacon and coffee that I try to get people to understand is, you can do this stuff yourself, right? You can go in and just decide to do it, but chances of you being successful are usually harsh, because I've learned in my business, I've tried it for years, trying to market myself sucks. All right. I market myself by doing a brain dump, handing it to somebody who is smarter, better at what I do, that can see it from the perspective of the end user, right? It's not that I don't know what the end user says, but when I say stuff, I talk Brian, right? I speak fluent Brian. I don't always speak fluent user. So in your case, what are the, number one, I want to encourage people that every doctor needs a doctor, every mentor needs a mentor, every coach needs a coach. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't be afraid to at least envision what that would look like. Nothing says everything's a good fit for everybody. But if somebody was to work with you guys and understand that they have that problem, they've defined it, they say, okay, yeah, this is something I need help with. What is the desired absolute best outcome for them? What would you want them to achieve? How do you feel successful when a client implements this?
Well, I'll start. I'll tell you that the majority of leaders come to us with some sort of holy crap moment, right? That the work culture is not civil, it's not respectful, it could even be toxic, etc. So they come to us because either the drama has raised the red flag, or productivity has gone down, which raises a red flag. So we say, here's this process. If you're able to generate a work culture that equally values respect and results, and again, we get into great detail on what that means and how to accomplish it, there's 3 primary benefits that occur in nearly every client we've worked with over the past 25 years. First, employee engagement, I know, goes up by 40% or more. And so that's interesting. And the next piece, engagement at that growth, leads to much better customer service, 40% greater ratings or more. Again, driven by engaged employees. They serve your customers better, which not surprisingly leads to 35% growth in results and profits. Now, all of a sudden, those leaders are reacting to what'd you say about results again? They grow by how much?
Yeah, right.
Because that's the way they're trained. And it's like,
Right.
again, this is about the combination of respect and results in a work culture on a day-to-day basis. Every interaction has to be consistently reinforcing the purpose and the products, how those people are being served, but also respectful to each other. And if that happens, then within 18 months plus, engagement will go up, which will lead to better customer service, which leads to better results and profits. And they go, oh, we can't get the results and profits first. No, you have to treat people nice.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and I'll make it quick, but I'll add to that. It's important that those data points, which Chris has tracked forever, and now we are together. Those data points, those started becoming real 10, 15 years ago. Now, let's get back to this so-called labor shortage thing. And you said this best, Brian. People who are treating people with respect in the workplace, people who value workplace respect as much as they track results, their employee retention is going through the roof. Their employee referrals are going through the roof. Labor shortage? No, we have a line out the door because our people actually like working here. And they're referring this place, this work, this culture to those 44 million people who left their jobs last year. And so it isn't, yes, engagement, I'll use the air quotes, engagement, customer service, profits, productivity, that's what catches the attention of the leaders. But right now, in this day and age, people who are starting this define, align, refine process are keeping good people. They're attracting even better people, and they're not suffering from this calamity called a labor shortage. They're meeting their deadlines. They're launching their post-pandemic recovery, which probably gets back to a question Jeff asked. I mean, the pandemic killed a lot of businesses, especially hospitality and restaurant, right? Well, look at a restaurant that's actually treating their staff well. They've already recovered. The pandemic's already behind them, even with all the restrictions and the different variants and everything. They're doing well. We were at a Mexican restaurant last night, line out the door in Colorado Springs, because historically, their owner has always treated people very, very well. And so all those food servers and support staff that left the other restaurants where they had lousy bosses and company cultures that sucked, where did they go? They went to the Mexican restaurant that has lines out the door. And that's what happens to every business so far anyway. We have had zero exceptions of people who grab this book and are willing to reflect a little bit and jump into the process. They're already seeing results. Even though it might take 12 or 18 months to completely change the culture, they're seeing quick wins right now.
So I just want to close with one final thought, and then I want to give you guys an opportunity to share your info and stuff like that. But so one of the things, and again, I'm not trying to push out my praises, but just kind of build the model around what you're talking about. My business is built around three different things. The first thing is, if I make my customers happy, if I keep the kids in the baby seat safe, right? If I make bottom line is my goal is to make my customers more money through marketing. That's it. That's what I do. If the customers are happy, they keep paying, right? Because if they spend $1 with me and they make $10, how often are they going to go to that slot machine, right? All day long, they're going to pull the lever. So you make the client happy and you have that purpose, then you understand that that's the best way to make a business win, right? The second piece of that then is what I try to do is get people who work for me to understand that their lives are more important. And what I do is I give them a task and I say, here's the deal. We try to work it out so that you get paid by the task and not by the hour, right? Because getting paid by the hour doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If I show you something and it takes you an hour the first time and you're satisfied with that, great. Now, if you could do 2 of them in an hour or 4 of them in an hour, you can bill me for 4 of them and you make more money and the more efficient you become. So my job is teach them how to be more efficient, put tools in front of them to make them more efficient so they can work less, make more, and have more time for their life. And then what happens is then I reap the rewards of my clients and my people. So I think that's kind of along the lines of what you guys talked about. Would you say that's a fair summary?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what is interesting, and I'll go back to your point about the self-awareness that needs to happen. If leaders realize that the greater the respectfulness that is demonstrated within and across their culture, they'll retain good people, attract good people, have more fun, produce like crazy, make more money, change more lives for the benefit. Now, that's not for every leader. Not every leader is going to be interested in all those things. But if you're not going to go down this path of making sure good comes first for your employees, you are going to struggle over the next 10 years because it's going to get worse. The voluntary quits are going to continue.
All right, we've hit that hour mark. So why don't you guys tell everybody how to get a hold of you, how to get the book, give us all the deets, baby. Who wants to go?
Well, Chris and I are both omnipresent on social media. We're old white guys who actually believe in the power of communication. So you can always find us on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And we appreciate everybody going to goodcomesfirst.com, where you can find not just the book, but some of our thoughts on the current workplace situation. And maybe it'll help you decide whether this is a book and a process that your company might need right now. So don't just go there to buy the book, but actually kind of dive in a little bit and see if this resonates with you.
Chris, anything to add to that?
No, it's perfect. And I'll tell you, we know that leaders are challenged by this current pandemic kind of ness. And it is likely that workplaces are never going to be able to tolerate the old 1970s, 1950s normal leader behaviors. So you got to change. You got to change. So this might help you get some confidence with where you need to go to modify the quality of your work culture.
And remember, my friends, normal is just a setting on the dryer. So with that being said, gentlemen, thank you so much for your insight, for your time, for your wonderful wisdom on this. I think what you're doing is so spot on. I really do. And I think people need to pay attention to this. So with that being said, I'm going to hit us with our closing. Guys, thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Everybody, we'll see you next week with our next Bacon and Coffee. Thanks, guys.